Ever since I started the show, I've always wanted to do a video on this director. I just needed to wait before I felt confident enough to really tackle his work. He is a director I respect and admire, and if I half-assed a video where he is the subject, I would never forgive myself. So here we go.
まず最初の質問なんですけども、監督さん今回がデビュー作というふうにちょっとお聞きしておるんですけれども。
Satoshi Kon, artist, writer, visionary director, the man responsible for giving me a deeper appreciation and love for the art form of animation. I often say that whenever we have a creator who is a true, unique entity that we may never see anyone like them ever again, I truly mean that with Satoshi Kon. He was, without a doubt, the anime director that really helped push the medium to new heights. You might say that Miyazaki and the rest of Studio Ghibli have been doing exactly that for the past couple of decades, but Kon was out here making stone-cold anime films for grown-ups, and not in the late-night Adult Swim kind of way either. His work was thought-provoking without being pretentious, exploring difficult subject matter that even non-animated films would be wary to touch, grounded in gritty realism while simultaneously applying a dreamlike atmosphere that played fast and loose with the fabric of reality. And it just makes it so unfair that he was only able to make 4 films in his lifetime. While it may be 4 more than most, it's still hard to accept that such a monumental creator's life like Satoshi Kon's was cut short at the age of 46. He died way too young and hadn't even peaked as a creator. Who knows what kind of films we would have gotten in the past 11 years if Satoshi Kon was still alive today. It's beyond impossible to even imagine. But we still have the movies he did complete in his time on this earth, and all of them are undisputed masterpieces. And because it is still Halloween, there is no better time than now to explore Satoshi Kon's debut film.
KYOTO ビデオ。
Mima Kirigoe is 1/3 of the J-pop idol group Cham. Despite never really making it on the charts, Cham has nevertheless developed a strong fandom, particularly around Mima. But those fans end up getting a shock when Mima announces that she is leaving Cham to pursue an acting career.
チャムとしての2年半、みんなに出会えて、ミマは本当に幸せでした。これからは一人の新人女優として頑張っていきますので、みんなも応援してください。
This is all at the urging of her agent, Mr. Tadakoro, and her manager slash former pop idol, Rumi Hidaka, both of whom feel like the traditional idol singer route is going out of style, and that if Mima wants any lasting fame, she should transition into acting. In the midst of this transition, Mima discovers a weblog called Mima's Room, a public diary with entries written by Mima describing her day down to the very detail. The only problem is, Mima didn't write any of it.
今日は帰りにいつものスーパーで買い物。ミネラルウォーターに牛乳。牛乳はやっぱり牛印よね。何よこれ。どうしてこんなに。
The decision for Mima to step down from Cham also ends up angering a Mima superfan named Me-mania, who begins to stalk Mima outside of her studio, watching and obsessively filming her every move. In order to further her acting career, Mima ends up having to endure many unsavory acts, such as being cast as the victim in a rape scene and taking part in pornographic photo shoots. This causes many mysterious incidents to start piling up around Mima, from threatening faxes to a letter bomb injuring her agent to murder. And as all of these events intersect, Mima begins to lose her grip on reality. She begins to hallucinate her pop idol doppelganger, chiding her for her choices. The lines between her real life and the role she's playing on camera begins to blur. And above all else, she begins to question whether or not she even is the real Mima.
違うよ、これは私じゃない。当たり前よ。これが本当のミマだもの。
First released on August 5th, 1997, Perfect Blue is an incredibly important title, not just in anime, not just in animation, but the entirety of film itself. It is one of the quintessential psychological horror movies, a film that presses its icy hands all over you, keeping you on edge while simultaneously stabbing you with 1,000 knives all at once. Satoshi Kon could not have asked a better way to announce his arrival to the film world. It's one of the few anime that, at the time when anime was just only then getting a foothold in American pop culture, really became your favorite star's favorite anime movie, porting such big name fans like filmmaker Terry Gilliam, singer Madonna, and, most famously, Darren Aronofsky. Perfect Blue was so influential to the director that in his future oeuvre, Aronofsky would shamelessly rip it off. I mean, continuously pay loving homage to it. But we're not here to make accusations, however true they may be, but to really celebrate such a monumental work by an equally monumental director. KYOTO Video has been doing Halloween videos for 3 years now, but it has rarely touched on psychological horror. And that's why Perfect Blue is the, well, perfect choice for that examination. It proved that psychological horror could work in the animation medium. But before I even continue, I just want to let everyone know that this is not another dime a dozen Perfect Blue explained video. I know it might be confusing for some, but to really appreciate Perfect Blue, you really don't need the entire synopsis regurgitated back at you. No, the best way to delve into Perfect Blue is to not just explain what happened and why, but to actually really explore what makes Perfect Blue such an effective piece of horror media.
言ったでしょ？私が本当のミマだって。
Satoshi Kon was born on October 12, 1963 in Sapporo, Hokkaido, Japan. He always had artistic aspirations and really had his heart set on becoming an animator. While he was attending university at Musashino Art University, one of Japan's leading art schools in 1984, Kon published his first manga called Toriko. But instead of being an underwhelming shonen manga written by a creep, it's actually a dystopian cyberpunk story in the vein of Akira. The manga earned Kon runner-up in Young Magazine's 10th annual Tetsuya Chiba Awards, and this got him the attention from the actual author of Akira, KATSUHIRO OTOMO. OTOMO was impressed with Kon's skills as an artist, and immediately hired him as an assistant while he was still in school. Satoshi Kon spent the rest of the 80s publishing short manga titles and assisting Otomo with various projects, giving him plenty of experience as an artist and a screenwriter. He would finally enter the anime industry in 1991 when Otomo hired him to be a key animator and background artist for Otomo's follow-up to Akira, Rojin Z. From there, Kon did various odd jobs throughout the anime industry, working as a screenwriter, layout artist, and background artist. But he still devoted time to working on manga, including a collaboration with Mamoru Oshii called Seraphim, Wings of 266,613,336. That manga would be left unfinished in 1994 when the partnership between the two creators ended, like most Mamoru Oshii collaborations, in acrimonious creative differences. The experience caused Kon to fully retire from making manga and become completely devoted to anime. It was good timing on Kon's part because that autumn, Madhouse producer Masao Moriyama would approach him and ask if he would be interested in actually directing a film. The film was to be a direct-to-video adaptation of a 1991 psychological horror novel named Perfect Blue: Complete Metamorphosis. Written by author Yoshikazu Takeuchi, the story follows Mima Kirigoe, a moderately successful idol singer who never quite hit the big time. Being that she's growing a lot older now, she begins to consider shedding the pure virginal image that her industry has carefully cultivated for her and transition to a spicier image to compete with her far more sexually charged rival, Ariel Chiai. but this plot ends up taking a darker turn when a fan of Mima's named Darling Rose cannot see her as anything but his impossible idea of a pure virgin, and soon begins to plan on murdering his favorite idol singer just so that she can stay pure and innocent forever. Seated at his desk, he resumed gazing at the front jacket of Innocence Forever. From the cover, Mima looked back at him, her hair short, her eyes big and round, her clothing cute and frilly. Her smile was as innocent as a baby's. As he looked at the picture, his eyes began to water. I have to protect the smile, he thought. That's why I need to act. Unlike most light novels released around this time, Complete Metamorphosis was purely for adults thanks to its subject matter and lack of illustrations, and it wound up being popular enough that Takeuchi began to shop around for a live-action film adaptation. But after he couldn't get funding for one, he ended up settling on an animated OVA adaptation instead. This is where we get back to Satoshi Kon. Kon being chosen to direct on a project was highly unusual considering that he had only been in the industry for 3.5 years up to that point. Usually, director is a position a person works their way up towards after 5 years in the industry minimum. But Maruyama was really impressed by his work storyboarding and directing the episode of the 1993 JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, where Jotaro has his final confrontation with Dio Brando, and that made him top consideration for the Perfect Blue project. So yeah, without JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Satoshi Kon's film career may have never taken off. By the time Kon accepted the project, the title and story had been set into stone, and Kon was less than happy with what he was given to work with. Kon was neither a fan of horror or idols, so he did not read the original novel. Plus, he felt that horror was a genre not well suited for anime, and that psychological horror movies in particular was a completely flooded market thanks to Hollywood. It also didn't help that the first draft of the film script had more of a slasher movie motif that was far more exploitative in content. Basically, the kind of cheesy OVA schlock that Kon would find beneath him. But Kon did not want to relinquish his directorial spot because, hey, when is he ever going to get a chance like this again? So he approached Takeuchi and asked if he could come up with an entirely new story for this project. Takeuchi agreed that he could make any changes that would work for him, but the story would only be approved if it met the 3 criteria. The main character is an idol singer, she has a stalker, and the primary genre of the movie still must be a horror movie. Kon would collaborate with screenwriter Sadayuki Murai to come up with a completely new story that fit within Takeuchi's perimeters. Murai wrote the first draft of the screenplay, while Kon added and removed elements as he saw fit. Kon would then write and direct all of the storyboards based on that script, making changes to dialogue as he saw fit. From there, the project went smoothly, but right when production on the anime was hitting the home stretch, Kon and his team received some unexpected news. At the last minute, Madhouse decided to scuttle plans for a direct-to-video release and make Perfect Blue a full-blown theatrical feature. This came to the surprise of Kon and the rest of the staff, as they had been operating under the expectation that Perfect Blue was going to be a niche title that was going to fade from the conversation after netting Madhouse a couple of bucks. Also, psychological horror was not a mainstream genre in Japan at the time, especially in anime, which was dominated by supernatural horrors and splatter films. Perfect Blue was a project that was largely uncharted territory. In fact, the reason why the Madhouse brass was so comfortable in selecting Kon to direct was because not a lot was riding on this film to begin with. But now with the sudden change in release, it meant that this funny little project that Kon and a bunch of Madhouse guys were getting all experimental with was now given the opportunity to be shown in international film festivals. This was an important first step to Satoshi Kon and Perfect Blue becoming the known quantities that they are today, really helped by the movie's poster emphasizing blurbs by famous Hollywood insiders. Dig this Roger Corman quote: "Alfred Hitchcock partnered with Walt Disney." You couldn't ask for a better summary of anime from a non-anime watcher. So now that we know how Satoshi Kon and Perfect Blue came to be, how did it all come together?
Get down!
When Perfect Blue was released in the West, it got an overall positive reception. However, there were some critics who questioned why a movie like this needed to be animated in the first place. After all, it's a very human story with little of the high concept trappings that most Western viewers had grown accustomed to seeing in the genre. Even the most thoughtful and critically acclaimed anime of the time did include a giant robot here or there. Frankly, Perfect Blue being animated does not really need to be justified, but really, it's the animation that does help make it scary. I couldn't give Kon all the credit here, it would be doing a disservice to all his other staffers who brought his vision to life. You have people like Hiroyuki Morita, who animated the opening concert scene with Champ performing, nailing down the choreography while emphasizing Mima's importance as the group's central figure. Then there's Takeshi Honda, who animated this amazing scene of Mima chasing the possible hallucination of her idol's self through the streets. Honda emphasizes the clear difference in character dynamic by the graceful yet incredibly eerie way virtual Mima playfully skips through her environments, while the real Mima is constantly stumbling and tripping over people in a frantically animalistic attempt to find out who this girl really is. An extra special thumbs up to Shinji Hashimoto, who animated the terrifying scene where Mima, or someone who looks like her, murders a photographer who took pornographic photos of her. It's the most violent scene in the movie just because of how Hashimoto makes every stab so forceful, so full of rage, complemented by the composition of Mima doing this in front of the projector showing her TV role, while each stab flashes back to her having to do certain favors for her victim. Another animator of note is animation director and character designer Hideki Hamasu. Kon hired him to be animation director because of how well he did the car chase for the aforementioned JoJo OVA. But it's the character design that he did with Kon that gives Perfect Blue its unique shine. All the characters eschew the anime rules of designing a cast and are instead to look like average Japanese citizens, albeit very caricatured citizens, just so they can give everyone a distinct look, like Rumi's eyes being a little too far apart to highlight her frumpiness. This philosophy of design is used to great effect in crafting the horror with the design of Me-mania. In universe, Me-mania doesn't turn too many eyes. At most, he would just be considered kind of funny looking in a general sort of way. But it's when he reveals himself as an obsessive stalker that his appearance looks more monstrous, gaunt, pale, crooked teeth that curve over the lips, unusually tall, which allows him to completely dominate every scene he's in. He's like an unstoppable zombie, which makes him fit the role of Mima's creepy stalker like a glove. But a design that most people may overlook is the design of Mima herself. Like with Morita's scene, it's one steeped in contrast. On stage, Mima is portrayed as this almost divine figure. Ruby red lips, skin white as snow, innocence emphasized by the prominent hair bow in her hair. She is a pillar of radiant beauty and purity, an image perfectly crafted to appeal to as wide an audience of the typical fans of J-pop idols. But it's made clear that the image is just that, an image. Off stage and out of makeup, Mima is pretty but still quite ordinary enough that she can easily blend in with a crowd. It serves to stress that Mima, despite having fame, is still a human being, and the image she portrays on stage is nothing more than a calculated illusion. It allows us to better empathize with her through the suffering and horrors she endures throughout the film. Speaking of horror, Masahiro Ikumi's soundtrack is the magical potion that gives Perfect Blue its eerie atmosphere. The background music is mostly this ambient cacophony of static, blaring synths and slowed down voices that grows steadily in order to emphasize a growing sense of anxiety throughout the film. The standout track, of course, being Virtual Mima, the self-titled theme of Mima's vision of her idol self. It's a soundscape where a ghostly choir's growing melody sounds like a drill into the skull to symbolize the real Mima's descent into madness.
そうよね。もうアイドルなんかじゃないもんね。だってあなたはもう汚れちゃったもの。汚れたアイドルなんて誰も好きになんないよね。違うもん。
And credit to Kon for taking some cheesy yet still incredibly catchy idol songs and use them to some really scary effects. staff really did work hard in building Kon's film. However, we do need to talk about Kon's involvement because he really is the one who made Perfect Blue what it is. Satoshi Kon is a true auteur. Even if he didn't want to make this film in the beginning, he really did end up making Perfect Blue his baby. All the best parts of this movie are the parts where it has his fingerprints all over it. First, there's his storyboarding. Kon has this uncanny talent to wring so much out of a single shot. They do not just move the story forward, but underline themes, symbolism, and above all else, atmosphere. The shot of Me-mania holding Mima in the palm of his hand speaks so much about his character and gives commentary on the idol fandom, while just filling you with this indescribable dread, all for a shot that doesn't even last a full minute. And there's also Kon underscoring Mima's deteriorating mental state by the state of her room. It goes from this clean, cozy apartment with warm lighting to this drab prison filled with trash and cold lighting. But this is all small potatoes compared to how Satoshi Kon directs and edits his scenes. When Kon really started to gain a fandom in the West, he earned the nickname the David Lynch of anime, and that name is not unearned. David Lynch is a director that enjoys blurring the lines between real logic and dream logic to tell his stories, and Kon employs a similar philosophy of filmmaking. When he was working as a screenwriter for Koji Morimoto's short film Magnetic Rose for Katsuhiro Otomo's anthology film Memories, Satoshi Kon became really fascinated with the idea of the borderline between dreams and reality being removed. This thought is reflected in Kon's editing where scenes flow through one another, but in a way that's deliberately jarring, like how a dream can suddenly shift from one environment to another. It's all it means to put yourself in Mima's shoes and feel what it's like to slowly start to disassociate from your surroundings. The scenes change from one to the next and you have no idea what's going on. Kon summed it up better than I could with the quote, "Viewers are too used to being treated kindly, so I've broken this pattern deliberately." This is best shown in the most important scene in Perfect Blue as it marks the movie's turning point, the rape scene. Some background. Mima has been cast in a lurid psychological thriller series called Double Bind, and the part she gets for it is too minor for her to really make a splash. So her handlers push for a bigger role to be written, and the producer says that they can make her character's role bigger if she's willing to play the role of the victim in a brutal rape scene. This causes some friction between her handlers. Mr. Tadakoro pushes for it as this could be Mima's big break and that she may never get a chance like this again. Rumi, on the other hand, is against this as it could irreparably damage Mima's reputation as an idol singer and make it impossible to go back if the acting career doesn't pan out. It ultimately comes down to Mima, who says she will do the scene, but only just because it looks like her only way forward as an actress. It's made clear that, even if she did make the choice in the end, it wasn't a willing one. When we finally get to the shooting of the scene, Kon draws a lot of attention to the fact that this scene is on a set. Lights and cameras are fully visible, the director periodically shouts cut and resets everyone's positions, the actor even committing the act against Mima's character whispers an apology to her before the cameras roll. So much is stressed that what is happening is all part of the movie. But the scene goes on for so long, and Junko Iwao's screams sound so real as Mima that it doesn't take long before the question crosses your mind of, is Mima really acting here? The reason why this scene is important is because it marks the point where the border between reality and dream is removed, the dream here being the stage. Mima's consciousness keeps fading from her real self to herself on stage, and we are taken along for the ride. We find ourselves questioning where the performance ends and reality begins. This motif also helps Kon in building the mystery. Kon is always keeping us, the audience, on our toes by feeding us just enough information that we can draw some conclusions, but still keep us guessing. He's also unafraid to intentionally mislead his audience. One scene can be constructed so it looks like a mystery has been solved, but then it pulls the rug right out from under you and you realize that the situation is far more dire than it appears. A good example of this is in the Mima's room plotline. At the end of Act 1, we see Me-mania reading the post of Mima's room in Mima's voice. This implies that Me-mania is the one behind Mima's room. This is supported by his constant presence lurking in the background of every location that Mima is in.
I have to say, singing in front of my fans is my favorite thing.
But we learn later that Me-mania is nothing more than an avid reader of Mima's room, and that the virtual Mima is personally emailing Me-mania to tell him that he needs to stop this fake Mima from ruining her reputation as a virginal idol at all costs. The identity of the person who runs Mima's room is no longer the obvious suspect, and that means it can be anyone, even Mima herself. But let us put a pin in that statement. For now, we move on to something really scary. Satoshi Kon may have been resistant to the idea of making Perfect Blue because he was not that tuned into idol culture, but he ultimately warmed up to the idea when he realized that, at the time, idols and its surrounding culture were something completely unique to Japan. Knowing this, Kon takes this opportunity to hold a mirror up to idol culture's very ugly side. Our first contact with Mima's fanbase really speaks volumes of what Kon thinks of the typical idol fan. The songs of Cham are innocent to the point of insipidness love songs dressed up in cutesy production, yet their audience is all fully grown men. Not a single little girl is to be found in that crowd. These men are also shown to be quite cynical and jaded. Most of them already know Mima's announcing her departure from the group, and they're mostly grumbling that she chose to do the final show at such a small venue. It's like they are aware of the ins and outs of the idol industry, and that somehow causes them to dehumanize Mima and the rest of Cham even further. By the way they talk about them, they might as well be talking about how well a horse will perform at the races. But what really reveals the fans' true face is how quick they are to discard Mima once she goes into acting. Some of her former fans are gloating about how she's destined to fail in acting, and that they never even liked her the most in the first place. And even her diehard fans' loyalty to her completely makes a 180 just because she does the unspeakable crime of not saying hello to them as they wait outside her place of work. Is the perfect indictment of not just idol culture, but the flippant nature of fan culture in general. Mima's fans worship her, but they sure as hell do not respect her, which makes it easy for them to just toss her in the trash once she no longer meets their unreasonably high expectations. And we haven't even got to Me-mania yet. Me-mania is the perfect symbol for fan culture at its most depraved. Like all of Mima's fans, he worships Mima like a goddess of incorruptible pure purity. But unlike most of her fans who abandon her the moment that illusion is broken, Me-mania stays loyal because his fandom isn't flippant, but actually a twisted, all-consuming obsession, and a possessive one at that. Me-mania's entire existence revolves around Mima. His room is covered in posters of Mima. When Mima does an interview talking about the aforementioned rape scene, he goes around town destroying magazines containing that article. And even when he attends a concert by the now two-piece Cham, he can only imagine Mima being on stage performing with him. Me-mania is so furious at Mima's change in image that he immediately buys into the lie of actress Mima being a phony imitating the idol Mima. But just because he wants Mima to be this ideal virginal goddess doesn't mean his thoughts of her are just as pure. When Mima's sexy pinup shoots make it to press, guess who's first in line to buy up every copy? Me-mania's toxic delusions finally reach their inevitable conclusion when he finally captures Mima, and his first instinct is to not kill her, but to try and rape her. Me-mania's misogyny dictates that this Mima was the one who manipulated her male victims into destroying Mima's reputation before killing them, and for that, she needs to be punished in the only way he knows how.
ダメじゃないか。台本通りにやらなきゃ。さあ、テイク2だ。
Satoshi Kon really knew how to sculpt toxic fan culture into its most nightmarish entity. If only he knew how bad it would get in the future. But for all of the scathing critiques Satoshi Kon heaps towards the idol industry and its surrounding culture, it is not the central theme of Perfect Blue. The true central theme is the theme that makes Perfect Blue such a chilling work of art in the first place. Remember, this isn't a film about idol culture, it's a film about Mima. When Satoshi Kon read the first draft of Perfect Blue's script, one of the things he really didn't like was the disproportionate amount of focus given to the stalker at the expense of Mima. It's what gave the original treatment that exploitative edge that left a bad taste in Kon's mouth. So while we may occasionally cut to other characters like Me-mania or the other members of Cham, Kon makes it a point to keep Mima the point of view character at all times, because this is essential in keeping the central motif of Perfect Blue and the source of its horror, identity and the loss of it. Perfect Blue opens with a group of kids watching a Super Sentai-esque stage show and coming away from it thinking that it looked fake in real life and that it looked more real on TV. This is Kon establishing two distinct yet very similar worlds, the real world and the stage, two worlds that Mima occupies at all times. Mima's character introduction does a good job in making that distinction. In between her performing on stage, we see scenes of her in the real world doing things that establish her character. We see her silently practicing on the train to show how devoted to her career she is. We see her grocery shopping to show how much she can blend in with ordinary life when she's not in her stage persona. And we see her caught in the middle of an argument between her handlers over her future, showing that she has zero agency of where her career path goes. The two worlds are clearly defined from here, but that begins to change when Kon introduces a third world to the equation, the internet.
これがワールドワイドウェブを見るブラウザ。これをダブルクリックして立ち上げるの。
Being that this film was being created right when Web 1.0 and early website culture was blossoming, Kon realized how easy it would be if a person wrote a post in your voice that can essentially create a whole new you in people's minds, whether you have knowledge of that creation or not. Mima is completely ignorant of the internet and computers in general, probably the last time a girl her age could get away with that.
このミマの部屋にリンク貼ったってことは、このミマの部屋ってのもホームページの名前なの。さっぱり？
And it makes the discovery of the blog Mima's Room go from, oh, look at this cute promotional blog, to, how does this person know what foot I used to get off the subway with? And as paranoid as this makes Mima, on top of the fear she has from the anonymous threats and just general imposter syndrome, Mima represses all of those emotions behind a mask of a professional actress, always willing to do the next scene lest she blow her big chance and be labeled difficult to work with. She's able to keep it together even after the rape scene, but once she goes home and finds her fish, the one joy she allows herself to have, dead, she breaks. This event is what brings virtual Mima into Mima's world. The hidden entity behind Mima's Room might just be her pop idol side taking a life of her own. And whether or not someone else is behind this doesn't matter anymore, because now Mima has become three separate entities: real Mima, actress Mima, and virtual Mima. Psychological horror is horror centered around the losing control of one's own mind and psyche. Therefore, what makes Perfect Blue so scary is that the point of view is entirely focused on the real Mima. We know virtual Mima is an identity created by an unknown third party that manifests into Mima's psyche, but no one really talks about how we stop seeing things through actress Mima's point of view after a certain point. The reason why Mima seems to slip in and out of consciousness, waking up at random times, is because Mima the actress is keeping Mima's life on autopilot. Actress Mima goes out, reads her lines without question, does Mima's chores, all while the real Mima has no memory of doing any of those things. This takes an even twisted turn when the murders begin and all signs point to Mima being the perpetrator, even though she has no memory of committing the acts. It finally gets to the point where Mima perceives events differently than what they actually are.
完全に自分を新人女優霧越美馬だと思っています。
そう、私は女優よ。
はい、チェック。
However, this is yet another example of Kon playing with his audience's expectations. It's stated outright in the film that the stage is perfect for crafting the perfect illusion, and Kon uses this knowledge to obfuscate the identity of who the real virtual Mima, and by extension, the killer, is.
ほら、見て見て、新しい衣装なんだ。
明日のイベントで着るのよ。いいでしょう。私にぴったり。
It is revealed that Mima's manager, Rumi, is the one behind the murders and Mima's room, because she herself believes that she's the real Mima. Rumi is a former idol singer that got chewed up and spat out by the industry, so she lived vicariously through Mima's success as an idol with a flawless pure image that she helped create. And since Mima has rejected that image, Rumi wants to keep it all for herself.
でも仕方ないよね。あなたのことは自分でまいた種だから。
The genius behind this reveal is that it's done through a shared hallucination. We see frumpy middle-aged Rumi now as the angelic virtual Mima, just like how Rumi herself sees herself. Mima also sees Rumi as the angelic virtual Mima, even though she knows that it's actually Rumi in a wig and an ill-fitting costume. What finally breaks the illusion for Mima is that she does something that she could never do when she was an idol singer. Take back control. Even though Rumi is attempting to murder her, Mima pushes her out of the way of an oncoming truck, saving her life. The last we see either of these characters, Rumi is permanently stewing in her own delusions in an insane asylum, while Mima has now finally taken control of her own life and psyche, symbolized by her driving her own car, when throughout the movie, she was always being driven by someone else.
私は本物だよ。
Even though it has a seemingly happy ending, it could still be another clever ruse by Kon. It's psychological horror in its purest form. What's more scarier than having who you are be stolen by another person without your knowledge? What happens when you yourself lose track of who you are and what you do through gaslighting and illusions? Like fandom, this fear has only gotten more potent in the age of social media, where anyone can just assume the identity of someone else and put words in their mouth without their knowledge. Someone you don't even know can just become you with the right words and right avatar. Satoshi Kon could not have predicted this happening, but it's one of the many elements that makes Perfect Blue the perfect psychological horror even today. Think about how there was almost zero expectations for this anime. No precedent set for the genre. It was the director's debut and one that he was unwilling to touch due to its subject matter. And it became an anime that defined both its subgenre and its director. The way it takes you through the mouth of madness, a hellscape constructed by the commodification of feminine beauty, toxic fan culture, and the illusion of film. It easily captures the nightmare of a world where the line between on-stage and off-stage has been erased. I can only talk so much about how this film works on so many levels, especially considering Satoshi Kon's work is only going to get even better from here on out. If you haven't seen Perfect Blue and you've made it this far in the video with me spoiling nearly every plot detail, I assure you I still haven't even covered everything this movie has to offer. You still need to watch it for yourself and see what you think. You can trust what I'm saying. I am the real KB after all.
All right, looks good.